Welcome to a very special interview on Channel I. Today we are conversing with a very special individual. Niranjan Deva Aditya is a Sri Lankan-born British politician. He is a member of the European Parliament and he has been a member of the British House of Commons. He was educated at St. Joseph's College in Colombo and he went to do his higher studies at Loughborough University in England. He studied aeronautical engineering and he was a postgraduate fellow in economics. Today, he is here with us. Welcome to the show, Mr. Niranjan.
Nice to be here, Unwin.
How were you drawn into a career in politics?
By accident.
By accident.
I will tell you the story. I was, as you said, at Loughborough University doing aeronautics, and I noticed that you are a mechanical engineer, so we share an engineering background. And I decided to run for the presidency of the Students' Union, and I got elected. The chairman of the Conservative Association at that time, and I wasn't involved in British politics. I didn't care about the Conservative Party or the Labour Party. I was from Sri Lanka. My grandfather had been a founding member of the UNP, and so on and so on. So instinctively, my mentality was about Sri Lanka and going back home after my education. But because I was interested in politics, I got elected president of the Students' Union. And then during that period, the chairman of the Conservative Association invited Mr. Willie Whitelaw, Edward Heath's deputy at that time, and later Margaret Thatcher's deputy. He was deputy prime minister under Margaret Thatcher, to come and address the students. So the chairman of the Conservative Association, David Hager, invited me to attend upon the great man. And I thought, why not? So I went to see what this guy had to say. And he made a long speech. And after the speech, we were invited back to have sherry in David's apartment. And while in the apartment, Mr. Whitelaw went around the room and said, well, what do you think of my speech? And so when it came to everybody, they said, very good, sir, very good, sir. And it came to my turn. I said, actually, sir, if you really want to know, it was a lot of rubbish. And that statement changed my life.
So, an offhand comment led to your career.
He said to me, why is it rubbish? And I said, you spent 40 minutes complaining that people from abroad wanted to come and live in England. You moaned and groaned about immigration. Not once did you say why they want to come and live in England. You did not talk about the great British institutions, of fairness, of justice, of opportunity, of a clean legal service, incorruptible judges, incorruptible civil service, democracy, all those things that make people want to come and live in England. Had you got up and said, what a wonderful country Britain must be, that even after we give independence to these people, they want to still come and live under the old colonial masters, then I would have said it was a good speech. But you just moaned and groaned. So that's why I think you said rubbish.
Of course.
And then he looked at me, he looked at his secretary, and he got up, and I thought, really, you've gone and done it, you big mouth. Here you are a student, you've been deported back or something. And he went to his car, he said to his secretary, give this young man my card. I thought, that's strange. So I got his card, and I looked at my friend David, and afterwards I went to David and said, he said to me, Mr. Whitelaw said, when you're in London, come and see me. So I went to see David. I said, oh, what's this about? So David said, he wants to see you. Go and see him. You insulted him. But obviously he wants to see you. So when I was in London, I rang his office, and this very pompous voice said, why do I want to see Mr. Whitelaw? I said, matter of fact, I don't want to see Mr. Whitelaw at all. He wants to see me. So that set something in motion. And I went to see Whitelaw, and he said, you know, I've been thinking about what you said. You're right. I was talking rubbish. Now, I want you to help me. Come and write my speeches and work with me. And suddenly, I was an 19-year-old Sri Lankan student, and then I was advising the deputy leader of the Conservative Party.
At the same time when you were studying engineering?
Yeah, because I said that he was talking rubbish. Translate that here.
Yeah.
And think of an 18, 19-year-old kid from a village, say in Kurunagala, say somewhere around Quadrangular, who says to the Deputy Prime Minister or Cabinet Minister that he's talking rubbish, and the next day he gets a job.
Yeah. Of course. So are you open to ideas as that person was,
Yeah,
correct?
then he became my mentor. I helped him with his speeches. I helped him to understand the race problems. He didn't know what a brown man, a black man, an Asian, a Sikh, a Punjabi, a Hindu, they're all the same to him. So I had to explain all the differences, how to deal with these problems. And then as time grew by, he asked me to be chairman of the Bow Group, which is the policy group of the Conservative Party. And then he said, we want you in Parliament.
How was it like running for office in a foreign land, a place where you stand out?
It is not easy. I had to go attend 125 interviews. 125 interviews.
You kept count.
To get my seat. I have gone all over the country because the way the Conservative Party selects a candidate is that you are put on a list, of approved list, and after the approved list, you are allowed to tick the boxes when a vacancy comes somewhere. But the local party members control who is going to be your MP. The party leader has no say because the MP is owned by the local MP, people. So the local people control who your MP is going to be. So I arrive in a town in Yorkshire. They've never seen an Asian before, or they do, and they think they're selling newspapers or driving taxis. And he wants to be our MP, and they will look at you and think, my gosh. So like this, I had to do 125 before I got my seat.
Now, with those interviews and a lot of political career happening, you've made it into the European Parliament. Now, we've heard of the EU in Sri Lanka. European Parliament, not so much. What is the role of the European Parliament?
That's very easy. The United States Congress and the California State Assembly. The British Parliament is the California State Assembly, and the European Parliament is the United States Congress and Senate. The same in India. Maharashtra State Assembly is the House of Commons. The Union Parliament of India is the Union Parliament. So the European Parliament make rules over 28 national parliaments. It's the superior chamber.
Okay.
That is why we want to leave it. Because Brexit is about not allowing the European Parliament the powers that should be in the House of Commons. All the powers of the House of Commons, except for sports, media, arts, health, hospitals and education, were moved from London to Brussels. So all those powers went to Brussels. Now, if you look at the balance of power between the United States Congress in Washington and the State Assembly, it's 50-50. If you look at the Indian structure between the Union Parliament in Delhi and the State Assembly of Maharashtra or Tamil Nadu, it's about 60 for the State Assembly, 40 for Delhi. If you look at Brussels, it's 70 for Brussels and 30 for London. And the British people got fed up of having laws made for them in Brussels. And so they wanted a referendum, and the referendum said, we want to make our own laws. We don't want the European Parliament making our laws.
What role do you envision for an ideal European Parliament?
Essentially, the European Parliament got too greedy and grabbed too much power. And as a consequence of which, it's destabilized the Union. Today, Hungary is unhappy with the European Parliament and the European Commission. Poland is unhappy. Now, Italy, they have got a populist party elected who want less power in Brussels, more power back to Rome. So the whole balance is shifting. Now, we have shown that we are not putting up with it. We are going to leave and give powers back to the House of Commons. So the 70% of the legislation that the European Parliament is now doing on behalf of the British people will be returned to the British Parliament, and they'll do 100% of their own laws. What you asked me a very important question. I'm addressing this now through you to Mr. Juncker and the President of the European Parliament. Get rid of your too much power and give it back to the member parliaments of the nation states, otherwise the EU will collapse.
That's a drastic prediction. Now, considering Sri Lanka, what is the European view regarding Sri Lanka?
Remember, the European Union is the richest entity in the world in terms of economic bloc. The EU's economy is larger than the United States and larger than China. And the EU, through the European Parliament and the European Commission, have a friendship agreement that countries that they are friendly with and want to encourage that growth gives them special concessions. That special concession is called GSP Plus, and it's only given to friends. It's not a right. For example, certain countries will never get GSP Plus because the EU doesn't like them. So if the EU likes a country, it says, okay, you're a particular friend, you're my friend, so I will give you more help. And I will allow you to export more to me. And I will not give you barriers to that export, including tariffs and quantity restrictions, rules of origin, and so on. So I will allow you to export to me because you're my friend, and it doesn't really matter to me because it's nothing in terms of my overall size of the economy. The EU economy is $18 trillion. The Sri Lankan economy is about this size in terms of the EU economy. Yeah. But if we reduce the duty on your exports, it's a huge impact on the Sri Lankan economy. So that's why we gave GSP Plus, and then we took it away because the previous government had promised to do certain things, which it did not do. And then this current government then put into effect those promises. For example, if I say to you, you're my friend and I like you, so I'm going to give you certain benefits. But please don't do torture. Please don't treat everybody equally. Women, children, adults, please have the equal laws for everybody. Please show that you don't give too much powers to the police, that the police are accountable to the judges, and it's the courts that control the police rather than politicians. Do that and I will help you.
Yes.
So, and you promise to do that, I help you, and you don't keep to your word. So we took it away, and now it's being put into back.
Now, what is your view of the development model followed in Sri Lanka?
You have a very good climate for agriculture, fertile soil. You have a huge tradition of hydraulic civilization, of cultivation with the tanks. Those tanks that the ancient kings created were not to feed 2 million Sri Lankans 1,500 years ago? That was to feed the whole of South Asia. Sri Lanka was exporting, using those tanks and that farms, all the rice and fruits and vegetables to the whole of South Asia. And it all got destroyed with malaria and the tanks breaking down and so on. But once you get those tanks moving back in action, creating agricultural produce, you can breed chickens, you can breed ducks, you can breed all sorts of animals and rice, vegetables and everything. And you make it an agricultural-based economy, as it was under Parakram Bahu.
Of course. Now, you're talking about developing the country. Now, Sri Lanka is also moving towards the future with innovation, encouraging innovation, encouraging innovators. How do you propose that we should attract innovative culture or breed innovation?
I have noticed in my time that Sri Lankans are very good at improving something, that if you give them something mechanical, they'll repair it and come up with a new way of doing the same thing. I don't know whether Sri Lankans are good at inventing things. Invention and
Yeah.
improvement are two different things, developing something. So if you look at our technical foundations in Sri Lanka, I'm very sorry to say, I see no encouragement given by the private sector even, except few companies, to innovation. We are making things that were made 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 10 years ago. Same way. Then on software, whereas India took a great leap forward in software, I don't know anyone in Sri Lanka who's created a software program or programs or apps or whatever that are world beaters. Artificial intelligence, I see no research being done here and development done on artificial intelligence, whereas in other countries, Japan, China, and I think in India, artificial intelligence is becoming a very important aspect of the next phase in growth. I see no particular input into robotics. Robotics is going to be the replacement industry, the third, fourth industrial revolution. What a lot of things that are being done by human beings are going to be done by robots. So where's your robotic research going on? Then nanotechnology, how to make things with, the nanoparticles and make textiles. Some textile companies I know are doing that, but as a whole, I see very little output, research papers or seminars on our nanotechnology capabilities. Even our plastic technology. There are many ways of dealing with plastics, which the world is now looking at. But there is no such technology that I can see in Sri Lanka. Now, Sri Lanka is a tea-growing country. Where is the innovation on tea? It's the same old tea that's being sold to the world. Whereas the other parts of the world are using new teas, instant teas, iced teas, fruit-flavored teas, canned teas in the United States. I don't know what role we are playing in this, and you know what I'm talking about. So we need to get up to the plate and start doing new things.
Of course, new innovation is always should be encouraged, and that
money available for enterprise. The Prime Minister is very keen on this. The Prime Minister is looking forward 100 years. Ranil Wickremesinghe's program is not for the next 5 years. He's laying down the foundations for this economy for 100 years. He's setting in motion the foundations, the legal structures, the processes, the thinking, the universe, for 100 years of development. A lot of people don't understand that he's not thinking of tomorrow and day after only. He's thinking further. And in that sense, we should set up an innovation fund and help people who want to do new things to get them funds to do that.
now your perspective is from within the EU. Looking from within the EU, especially at South Asia, where a monumental change has happened, how do you feel that we should face the future of technology and new ideas?
But then the Sri Lankan private sector must have a prominent role, because it's the Sri Lankan private sector that's kept this country afloat. The Sri Lankan public sector, I have to tell you, is awful. The decision-making process, the delays, the corruption, the constant committees, subcommittees. Private sector doesn't do that. The private sector looks at a project, it makes a decision at the board of directors, and it gets it done. So, unless the public sector is aware of time, that time is money, and that concept is not in the public sector, that time is money. When a civil servant tells a foreign investor, so you want to come and make profits from our country, what does the investor think? He says, okay, then I'll go and make profit somewhere else. So the culture of the public sector has to change, and as far as I'm concerned, Britain and the United States are so prosperous because they have less government. The public sector is not allowed to interfere in the private sector.
No, that is conservative government.
No, even the socialist governments, Tony Blair's government and following that, don't interfere in the decision-making process. They are talking about how to share the cake afterwards. Conservatives will say if you make a big profit, you keep it. Socialists will say no, if you make a big profit, you have to share it with the poor. Okay, that's a different political issue. Let me give you an example. If you want to build a power station in England, you get in a car and you go and look at a brownfield site, which is zoned brownfield, wherever, then you measure it for your power station. You go to the local authority that has a planning authority over that brownfield site. You say, I want this brownfield site, and I want the pipes, tube, and access. I'm going to build a project. You don't even have to tell the local authority what the project is. Then you start building the power station, you get the equipment in, you ring up the national grid, and you say, right, on the 1st of September, I'm ready to give you 100 megawatts of power. How much are you going to pay? You do a power purchase agreement, you start your machines, you sell the power. You think anybody in Whitehall in London knows that you build a power station in Leicestershire? No. What has the minister got to do with it? Nothing.
So
it's a private thing. The national grid, which is where the power is distributed, wants power, you sell it to them. It's a market mechanism. And if I want to build a power station and sell my unit of electricity for such and such a value, and they want to buy it, that's it, done. Here, it will take 7 years. This committee, that committee, subcommittee, cabinet committee, this, that man, that man, that man, that man. What for? That model that we are using is the model used for colonial control. England doesn't have the same colonial controls that they brought and deposited in India and Sri Lanka. These permits and the power, you had to get permission, was done for London to control India, London to control Sri Lanka. London doesn't control England with permits. What permits? We don't have permits. You want to do something, you do it.
So investor-friendly, more investor-friendly.
Yeah, what we are using here are the imperial controls that the British used to control Sri Lanka, which after independence we kept, and on top of that we put more regulations. So is it any surprise that Sri Lanka is not developing as fast as Britain or other countries which don't have these controls? Look at Singapore. The first thing Lee Kuan Yew did when he got elected was he threw out every single rule, the rule book that British had left. And he created his own rule book.
So
that was helpful for pro-development. But we are using colonial rules.
So do you think the Singaporean development model would work in Sri Lanka?
Yes, provided the educated people are there. But you can't develop a colony, a former colony, using colonial instruments.
One area you have provided leadership has been on the Korean issue, which has dominated the news cycle in the recent past. Now, what are some key aspects that the general public should be aware of regarding this issue?
Yes, I have been having secret meetings with the North Koreans, and I have been trying to understand what they want. I know what they want, and I know how they will get rid of their nuclear weapons.
How so? Is
But
it
I'm
secret?
not publicly going to say all this,
Yeah.
but I know what they want and how they are going to get rid of them. So I have told the White House and President Trump and his advisors, go slowly, step at a time, without preconditions. The North Koreans have told me time and time again that we don't want to end up where Mr. Saddam Hussein ended up or Muhammad Gaddafi ended up. Muhammad Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapons, and 2 years later he was gone. Our nuclear weapons are there to protect us. But we are willing to get rid of them in return for certain things. So it's a long-term negotiation that is going to take minimum 5 years. Mr. Trump wants it done in 3 weeks. It cannot happen. There are 390 nuclear sites in North Korea buried deep in caves and all over the place. There are 9 nuclear sites in Iran. And Mr. Trump said, in these 9 nuclear sites, the Iranians are breaking the agreement. I don't believe so, but he said that. He couldn't monitor 9 sites. How the heck is he going to monitor 390 sites?
If the reconciliation is done correctly, we will one day see united Korea.
Yes, North Korea is a remnant, a hangover from the Cold War. The Cold War with Russia, Soviet Union, came to an end when Mr. Gorbachev, Mrs. Thatcher, Mr. Reagan, and Mr. Kohl sat down with the Soviet leadership without preconditions. They just sat down and they said, okay guys, what we are doing is crazy, building more and more and more weapons and depriving our people of education, schools, hospitals and food. We've got to stop this nonsense and start reducing these weapons and divert more resources to our people. Correct? So that started strategic arms limitation SALT talks, and they removed nuclear weapons and they ended the Cold War by sitting down and talking without preconditions. If you have preconditions and you only say, I will only sit down, if you have already agreed to do this, come off it. And that's what's happened sadly this last week.
Of course, we are all hoping for a peaceful resolution at this
point. And I'm
point.
going to carry on working. I'm going hopefully to North Korea soon, and I'm going to see the White House and all that. But you've got to play the game according to a certain way of negotiating using leverage. North Koreans played. They did a brilliant job in changing the perception from being pro-conflict, pro-war, now to being pro-peace. And they trapped the US into appearing to be the belligerents.
Yeah. Now, the other side is, of course, South Korea, not the US. But how important is the role of the US and China in this matter?
Well, China doesn't want to have a conflict on its border because it will have to deal with a refugee crisis. If there is a conflict and nuclear weapons or even tactical nuclear weapons are used or something goes wrong, the eastern China will get radioactive material coming over. There will be millions of refugees pouring into China. They don't want that problem. At the same time, the United States, I don't think, wants to have a war in North Korea to get rid of the nuclear weapons because it could start off the Third World War. How did the First World War start? No one actually knows why they had a war.
Yeah.
But 100 million people died. That's 5 times the population of Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
And nobody knows to this day why it happened.
Yeah.
And that is the danger with North Korea.
Of course. Now, what is your view of China and USA, especially as superpowers?
You asked a very important question. When one empire rises, the empire that was number one, which is declining, and the rising empire frequently go to war. The only time it did not happen was when the British Empire, in 1900, at the beginning of 1900, Britain's empire was the biggest empire in the world. Its economy was twice as big as anybody else's, and it ruled the world where the sun never set upon it and all that, right?
Yeah.
Between 1900 and 1930, the British Empire started declining and the American Empire started coming up. The first time in human history when one empire was replaced by another empire, or when one power was replaced by another power as number one, they didn't go to war.
That was the only time.
Only time. Now, I'm appealing to the Americans and the West that if China rises up as number one, do what we did under the rules-based system, the Bretton Woods post-war rules-based system that we had created so that China and the United States, as the two biggest powers, coexist and work together. then the future of the world is secure. If they don't coexist and work together, and they challenge each other, we are into a terrible period. And that is unnecessary, because China and the United States can be complementary, not competitive.
You mentioned something that's very important that I overlooked during our conversation about the Brexit. Britain has a very large economy. How does that affect the future of the European Union's economy?
The British economy is the fifth largest in the world,
Yeah.
but the German economy and the French economy are larger than the British economy.
So Britain moving out of the EU, it doesn't have that much
Will
of
affect about 8% of its GNP, the EU GNP.
Okay. So do you expect the EU to continue its function?
The EU will continue, if they don't listen to me, to integrate faster now, because the brake, the guy who was putting the spokes in the wheel, Britain, has left.
Yeah.
And they will try to create a country called the United States of Europe, a single country, like the United States of America. And at that time, the internal tensions among the member states. Remember, the United States of America could only be formed after a civil war, the bloodiest civil war in human history, where millions and millions of people died, the North fighting the South. Ostensibly, the war was supposed to be about emancipation of slaves and letting the slaves free. But actually, it was about power. Who was going to run? The states were going to run each state, and Washington was just a weak unit, or it was Washington running the states. And that was what the war was about.
What is your view of a utopian future for the world itself? Do you envision a one large government, or do you envision one common market government?
Oh, boy. I'm a Christian. I believe that we are all sinners in the fallen state, and that we need to redeem ourselves and ask the Creator to take us to a better place. So this is not heaven on earth. Our only job is to try and make life better and kinder and more acceptable to our brethren who are suffering. The disparity in today's world wealth is disgusting. Do you know that 8 people in the world own more wealth than 70% of the world's population? The world's population is nearing 7 billion. 5 billion people own less than these 8 human beings. The West has created huge wealth for a few people. For example, if Mr. Gates wanted to invest half his money in Sri Lanka, he can buy the whole of Sri Lanka. If Mr. Richard Branson wanted to invest 1/5 of his money in Sri Lanka, he can buy the whole of Colombo. What utopia?
So there are room for improvement, but a lot of stuff need to be addressed. Thank you, Mr. Aditya, for that very informative discussion. It was a pleasure to have you on.
I enjoyed talking to you too.
And thank you for joining us for this very special interview with Mr. Niranjan Deva Aditya, who is a member of the European Parliament. Thank you for tuning in.